The room wasn't silent because the mic was off. It was silent because every word AOC said hit like a gavel. Marjorie Taylor Greene walked into that hearing with fire in her voice and fury in her eyes, ready to grandstand and dominate. But she wasn't ready for what waited on that table. A single red folder. No shouting, no spectacle, just facts. Sharp, surgical, unforgiving. And when AOC opened it, when she began to speak, the air shifted. What followed wasn't just a takedown. It was a masterclass in composure, courage, and constitutional clarity. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. And one by one, Republicans who had come to mock, to dismiss, to grandstand, sat in stunned silence as she turned receipts into reckoning. Because when truth walks in armed with evidence, even the loudest lies fall quiet. This story is a dramatized depiction based on real political figures and public discourse. While fictionalized for narrative impact, the emotions, the stakes, and the questions it raises are all too real. So if you think you've seen AOC in action before, think again. This wasn't a moment. This was a message. And trust us, you'll want to see how this ends. The camera cuts in. Room 2141 of the Rayburn House office building. Lights sharp, cold, unforgiving. The seal of the Oversight Committee gleams in the background. Phones are already recording. Someone coughs. Someone else whispers. The oxygen feels tight. At the center of the hearing table, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene leans into her mic like it's a weapon. She doesn't smile. She doesn't blink. She speaks as if she's ready to burn something down. The American people deserve to know where their money's going and who's helping big tech cover it up. She spits the words like they have been waiting all month to escape. Behind her, a printed chart waves slightly. Bold red arrows pointing from the Department of Education, the CDC, even FEMA, toward one oversized photo of Elon Musk, smirking like a Bond villain. Someone behind the press table raises an eyebrow. Another reporter leans forward. Greene lifts a thick folder and slams it onto the table. This is proof, she says, that under Democrat leadership, the government has become nothing more than a data mining piggy bank for Silicon Valley. There's a low murmur. She smirks. She thinks she's already won. But across the table, directly opposite her, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sits motionless. No smirk, no folder in hand. Just a single red file placed carefully in front of her, closed, untouched. The room begins to shift its weight. You can feel it, like a courtroom holding its breath before the final witness. No one knows what's in the red folder. No one knows if AOC is ready to strike, or planning something even worse, to let her opponent collapse under the weight of her own noise. The chairman, an older Republican from South Carolina, shuffles his notes, trying to reassert control. We'll proceed in order. You'll each be given 5 minutes to respond. And yes, he adds, glancing awkwardly at Greene, decorum is expected. MTG leans back, satisfied. Her points have been launched like arrows. She expects chaos, shouting, finger-pointing, but there is only silence. That's when the camera catches it. AOC gently reaches forward, taps the edge of the red folder with her fingernail. Once. It's a tiny sound. But somehow in this room it sounds like thunder. She doesn't open it. Not yet. She just looks at it, like it's alive. And suddenly everyone is looking too. Even MTG, mid-monologue, glances over. Just for a second. That's all it takes. The balance of the hearing shifts. Subtly. Power moves like gravity. And in this room, it's starting to slide left. There's a new kind of suspense forming. Not the shouting match, talking point type of suspense that fills primetime cable. This is the tension of someone who doesn't need to raise her voice to raise the stakes. Someone who has chosen to wait, not because she's afraid, but because she knows the longer they underestimate her, the harder the landing will be. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez will respond after opening statements, the chairman says, not quite hiding his own curiosity. Somewhere in the back, a producer whispers to their assistant, "Clip this moment. There are no witnesses today." The star expert MTG had promised, some so-called fraud investigator from Texas, canceled last minute. Rumors swirl in the press pit. Was he pulled? Was there a conflict of interest? Or was he never real to begin with? And yet there sits AOC. No grand chart, no team of lobbyists, no choreographed props. Just a red folder and a reputation for dismantling opponents with precision. But here's the thing. She hasn't spoken a word yet, and that's what's terrifying them. Because in a room where noise usually wins, silence, when intentional, is terrifying. The longer she waits, the more the folder becomes mythic. What's inside? Evidence, leaked emails, a financial trail connecting MTG's super PAC to classified defense contracts. Some viewers in the live chat already have theories. It's the receipts. It's going to be another TikTok moment. She's about to cook. And here's the brilliance. AOC isn't performing. She's preparing. She's letting the anticipation do the work for her. Every second she sits silent, the story builds itself. MTG doesn't know it yet, but she's already lost control of the narrative. Outside, protesters gather under gray DC skies. Some carry signs that read, "Truth over noise." Others simply hold up red folders, blank, symbolic, ready to go viral. In one classroom in the Bronx, a high school civics teacher pauses the live stream and asks his students, "Why do you think she hasn't spoken yet?" A kid in the back says, "'Cause sometimes the most powerful move is making them wonder what's coming." And in that moment, across the country, across the algorithms, across the feed, people stop scrolling. They lean in, because the folder hasn't opened yet, because AOC hasn't spoken yet, because something's coming and they can feel it. This is no longer just a hearing, it's a reckoning waiting to unfold, and it's only just begun. The chairman cleared his throat. The gentlewoman from New York is now recognized for 5 minutes. A soft hum of anticipation buzzed through the room like static before a storm. Cameras tightened their zooms. Reporters leaned forward. Marjorie Taylor Greene crossed her arms, her lips curled in quiet defiance, as if bracing for a typical partisan rebuttal. But that wasn't what came next. AOC didn't raise her voice. She didn't lunge into moral outrage. Instead, she leaned slightly into the mic, voice calm, steady, surgical. "Let's talk about the receipts. No shouting, no theatrics. Just 5 words." And yet in that moment, the temperature of the room dropped by 10 degrees. She slid the red folder open with one hand and pulled out a single sheet. Not a stack, not a prop, a page, crisp and marked. The kind of page that speaks louder than slogans. "This," she said, "is a summary of contract allocations granted to privately held defense-aligned tech companies in the last fiscal year." She paused, not for effect, but for clarity. Not reviewed, not questioned, not audited. And then she added, "Just signed." Across the aisle, Greene shifted in her seat. The smirk had started to fade. AOC raised the page so it faced the cameras, the hearing room, and, most importantly, the American public. Here's what we're not being told. While teachers across the country are being laid off, while emergency aid is stalled, while children attend schools with crumbling ceilings and missing textbooks, we've greenlit over $2.1 billion in direct federal contracts to tech companies with no competitive bidding, companies whose CEOs have appeared more times in the Oval Office than elected representatives of entire districts. Her words weren't venom. They were voltage, quiet but undeniable. And now the red folder was no longer mysterious. It was magnetic. She pulled another page. Page 2, a breakdown of senior-level private meetings inside the White House. Here's a name that appears 7 times in a single quarter. Elon Musk, not as a contractor, not as a witness, but as what's now being described by some officials as an unofficial advisor. Her eyes scanned the room, but her voice remained unwavering. "Let me ask this plainly, because the country deserves plain answers. Who gets a seat at the table when voters don't?" A beat of silence, a rare thing in hearings like these. It lingered, not awkward, but necessary. She didn't stop. She knew exactly where this was going. We're told we can't afford student loan forgiveness. We're told universal health care is a fantasy. But we somehow have room in the budget for corporate subsidies disguised as innovation, for contracts awarded without transparency, oversight, or accountability. A murmur from the back of the room. One of the aides fumbled with their tablet, scrolling faster. nervously checking the real-time feed online. The live stream comments lit up. She brought charts. Red folder equals death note. Greene's done. This is a TED Talk with teeth. AOC tapped the folder again, then continued. Let's be clear. This isn't about tech. It's about trust. Because while we debate over whether an after-school meal program gets extended, billionaires are given unchecked access to federal infrastructure, and now, disturbingly, even to policy influence. She lifted her gaze, locked eyes with Greene for the first time. The American people didn't vote for Elon Musk. They didn't elect him to lead on health, education, or national security. So why is he shaping how these systems function while members of this very committee are sidelined in the process? The room went quiet again, not out of fear, but because no one could answer that question with a straight face. AOC closed the folder, not dramatically, just deliberately. And let's stop pretending this is just about numbers on a spreadsheet. Every dollar misallocated isn't just waste. It's a classroom without a teacher, a clinic without a nurse, a city block without clean water. And then she said something that made even a few jaws in the back tighten. If we're going to call this oversight, then it's time we stop overseeing the poor and start examining the powerful. A few staffers tried to keep their faces neutral, but it was too late. The damage was done, or depending on your angle, justice had just begun. The chairman blinked twice. Greene gripped her pen, but AOC didn't even glance at them again. She simply looked forward. I yield back, she said softly. But make no mistake, the impact didn't. Because in those 5 minutes, she didn't just lay out data, she laid out a framework. One that connected privilege to policy, money to silence, power to absence. She didn't scream. She didn't interrupt. She just asked, who gets a seat at the table when voters don't? And in that moment, millions watching from home, from classrooms, from break rooms and buses, felt the question land right where it belonged, squarely in the gut of a system that had gone too long without being asked. She didn't rush. That was the first thing everyone noticed. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't flip the folder open like a dramatic movie twist. She peeled it open like a surgeon approaching something delicate but diseased, fully aware of what she was about to expose. The red folder lay flat. Her fingers moved with practiced precision. The first page she pulled out wasn't just a document, it was a map. Not a political map, not a military map, a money map. Lines, arrows, accounts, timelines. From the Department of Defense to SpaceX to a cluster of super PACs in Georgia, Florida, and the screen behind her flickered as aides projected the diagram. Rome, Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene's home district. A murmur rippled through the committee. It wasn't noise, it was realization. The kind that sinks in when people suddenly suspect they're no longer observers, but collateral. This, AOC began, her voice razor-sharp in its calmness, isn't just about misplaced funding. This is about redirected influence. Federal money meant for defense infrastructure has been funneled, quietly, strategically, into tech expansions that coincidentally align with campaign activity in key swing states. She turned the page. Another map, a more intricate one. This time, dotted lines stretched from Air Force logistics centers to private satellite launches, then veered, subtly but unmistakably, into political ad buys and patriotic digital outreach programs backed by third-party committees. The pipeline isn't just steel and satellites, she said, eyes now locked not on the page, but directly at Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's also narrative. And right now, the American people aren't just being asked to fund defense, they're unknowingly financing distortion. The camera zoomed in. Tight shot. MTG's face flickered. A blink, a hard swallow. Then, almost imperceptibly, she glanced to her right, to the staffer seated behind her, nervously scrolling through something on a tablet. It was quick, but not quick enough. The internet saw it. The live stream caught it. And within minutes, screenshots of that exact moment were circulating on Twitter with captions like, "When you realize she brought actual evidence. That's not just a folder. That's a scalpel. She's dissecting the system, live." AOC didn't blink. She moved to the third page. This one had names, dates, donation timestamps. Government contracts issued within 72 hours of high-dollar political contributions. Each entry followed the same pattern. A no-bid contract signed off by a defense subcontractor, a silent wire transfer to a payee, a targeted ad campaign smearing public investment programs in education, climate, and healthcare. We're told that the market is free, AOC continued, her tone now laced with something deeper, something closer to moral clarity. But what kind of free market requires federal oxygen to breathe and political obedience to grow? Greene shifted again. This time she reached for her water. Her hand trembled just enough to make the glass clink against the metal coaster. AOC wasn't done. She lifted one final page. This one wasn't a map. It was a screenshot, an internal email from a former staffer at a tech policy think tank, now turned whistleblower. The subject line? MTG briefing prep, coordinate W. Elon's policy lead. Dated just 4 days before the hearing. The room didn't gasp. It did something worse. It went completely still, the kind of stillness that makes people uncomfortable. Because silence in a place built on talking means truth just landed too hard to be ignored. If we're serious about oversight, AOC said, quieter now but no less commanding, then we need to start asking why billionaires are shaping defense strategy, influencing local elections, and getting special access to the people's data, while teachers in my district are fundraising for chalk. She paused. It's not about hate, it's not about envy, it's about equity, and it's about reminding this body and the people watching at home that oversight isn't about volume, it's about vision. The red folder lay open now, not empty, not performative, but exposed. AOC gathered the documents neatly. She didn't slam them. She didn't hold them up for a final jab. She simply laid them down like the quiet end of an autopsy. She wasn't accusing. She was diagnosing. And in that moment, the hearing no longer felt like a battle of left versus right. It felt like something deeper, something colder, a confrontation between truth and machinery, between the system we were told existed and the one she had just unzipped. One reporter tweeted, "This wasn't testimony. This was a dismantling." AOC didn't look at Greene again. She didn't have to. The red folder had done the talking, and America was still catching its breath. The folder lay closed now, but its echoes hadn't. The red ink may have dried on those pages, but the tremor it unleashed still rippled across the room like a silent alarm that only some were willing to hear. AOC leaned in once more, not for performance, not for posturing, but because the question she was about to ask wasn't aimed at just the committee. It was aimed at the entire structure holding the room up. "Can someone explain," she began, her tone calm but electric, "why the cafeteria budget in a public school is subject to 3 levels of audit, while a $700 million defense contract to a tech billionaire receives 0 independent review?" No one answered. Not because they didn't hear, but because there was nothing safe to say. The camera cut briefly to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Her expression, stone cold just minutes before, now flickered with something far more dangerous. Calculation. A scan of exits, narrative shifts, possible deflections. But AOC wasn't looking at her anymore. She was looking directly into the heart of the system and tearing away the insulation it had relied on for decades. "We audit teachers to the penny," she continued, voice rising just slightly. "But satellites fly under the radar, literally." The room didn't move. Not a cough, not a creak. Because everyone at this point realized she wasn't just attacking a contract. She was revealing a double standard so obvious it had to be invisible to survive. AOC reached down and lifted a second folder. This one blue, smaller, slender. She opened it, revealing line items from the Department of Education's yearly budget process. "Here," she said, holding up a document, "is a 29-page review of a $48,000 funding request for STEM curriculum in a Title I elementary school in the Bronx. I know because it came from my district. That request took 6 months, 3 layers of approval, 2 rejected drafts, and a compliance hearing." She paused, just long enough. "Now here," she reached for a third document, one of the red folder's final sheets, "is a $438 million contract awarded to a private space contractor for satellite surveillance support. No competitive bidding, no third-party audit, and no itemized invoice. Another stillness. And then with sharp precision, she delivered the line that would explode across headlines before the hearing even ended. If justice is blind, why can it read school budgets down to the comma, but needs a telescope to find defense corruption? That was it. The sentence. The hook. Clipped in seconds. Uploaded to TikTok. Spun into memes. Cut into reels. Added to compilation videos titled AOC Speaking Truth to Power and When She Didn't Even Raise Her Voice. But in the room, it wasn't viral. It was visceral. A staffer near the back shifted uncomfortably in his chair, gripping a report he now knew would be obsolete by noon. Reporters began whispering behind their hands, unsure if they were witnessing oversight or an autopsy. AOC pressed forward, her words now turning from surgical to seismic. We're told there's no money for universal pre-K, no budget room for mental health in schools, no space for expanding Pell Grants. But somehow, there's always space in the silence for the contractors who dine at the edge of secrecy. She didn't pace. She didn't gesture wildly. She simply held her ground like someone who knew that the truth doesn't need drama, just daylight. She flipped another page. In the past 5 years, over $3.2 billion in no-bid contracts have been issued to a network of private space and defense firms. And of those, over 70% share direct or indirect ties to PACs, funding aggressive anti-public education campaigns. These aren't coincidences. These are coordinates. Across the table, Greene's foot tapped lightly. She reached for her pen, wrote something on a notepad, then crossed it out. She'd lost the plot, and worse, she knew the cameras knew it. AOC wasn't gloating. There was no time for that. She had a nation watching and a lesson to deliver. If we want a government that serves its people, we have to start asking what kind of oversight protects billionaires, but audits bus routes. What kind of patriotism throws books off shelves, but lets billions disappear into satellites we're not allowed to question? Her voice dropped into something quieter now, something more personal. In my district, a mother once told me she had to choose between buying internet data or keeping the heat on in January. She chose the data, so her daughter could keep up with homework, and we call that resilience. But what do we call it when billionaires write off private space stations and get reimbursed in full? She held up the last page. It was simple. A list, 10 lines long, 10 contracts, 10 companies, 9 of them with closed-door connections to the same handful of political operatives. The math is clear, but more importantly, the moral clarity is even sharper. She looked up, steady, piercing. Oversight without equity is just theater, and I didn't come here to perform. I came here to account. The hearing was still going, technically, but in every meaningful sense, it had already changed. Because in that moment, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wasn't a witness. She was a witness bearer, not just to waste and fraud, but to the quiet theft of public trust. And millions watching from their phones, their classrooms, their break rooms, knew they weren't just hearing receipts, they were seeing the system for what it was, and what it had tried not to be seen as. It didn't take long for the counterattack to come. Marjorie Taylor Greene snapped her mic open with a flick of her wrist, her voice rising like a siren at midnight. Let's call this what it is. AOC isn't fighting for accountability. She's fighting against American enterprise, against innovation, against private success. She turned toward the cameras, trying to reclaim the frame, trying to reframe the hearing as an attack on freedom, not fraud. You don't like Elon Musk? Fine. But don't pretend this is about contracts. This is about Democrats punishing those who build. The line was meant to sting. On cue, a few conservative aides behind her nodded in rhythm. But AOC didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react. She waited. And then, in that same unsettling calm that had already ripped through the room like a slow-moving fault line, she leaned in and said, "Congresswoman Greene, I'm not afraid of what they build. I'm afraid of what they're allowed to collect while building it." The silence snapped like dry ice on metal. She reached into the red folder again. No rush, no flare. This time she pulled out a single creased printout. Not glossy, not color-coded, just plain, ugly truth. This, she said, is a cybersecurity memo from a Department of Defense contractor, dated just 6 weeks ago. It outlines a pattern of unauthorized data access requests routed through private satellite networks, specifically Starlink, with no federal oversight and no reporting to Congress. The screen behind her lit up. A crude table appeared, stripped straight from a redacted PDF. Query volume per day, 470,000 plus U.S. origin requests flagged as non-transparent, 26% end-user identity traceable. No, this isn't just traffic, she continued. This is personal data, coordinates, patterns, conversations, entire behavioral maps built off of Americans who never consented. Not for commercial use, not for national security, just vacuumed, at scale, and stored God knows where. Greene's mouth opened slightly, but the sound never came. The oxygen in the room had shifted again. AOC raised the second sheet. This one was an internal email. Its metadata clean, time-stamped, and damning. From an engineer inside a government subcontractor. We've flagged Starlink's lateral data pulls, but we've been told to let it run for now. Too politically sensitive. The quote appeared behind her. Big, white text on black. It didn't need interpretation. The hearing wasn't about budget anymore. It was about surveillance, about power, about who watches and who gets watched. When did we become comfortable, AOC asked, voice steady, with privatizing not just infrastructure, but intelligence? No one answered. Not Greene, not the chairman, not the rest of the panel. We are auditing lunch menus, she added, while someone else is auditing our democracy from the sky. Then she dropped the line that would go viral across every platform within an hour. When the cloud becomes the battlefield, citizens become the product. In the gallery, someone gasped, quietly but audibly. Even the stenographer looked up. Phones buzzed, aid screens lit up. Twitter, or X as it now appeared, exploded. Just heard it. Citizens become the product. Give her the MIC. She's not debating, she's diagnosing. This isn't a hearing, it's history. And in the live stream comment section on YouTube, she just dropped the Snowden bar but sharper. MTG brought fireworks, AOC brought fireproof logic, but AOC wasn't done. This isn't a question of left or right, it's a question of consent, of how far we're willing to let unelected, unaccountable corporate titans stretch the word partnership until it snaps into submission. She pointed, not at Greene, but at the committee seal behind her. Oversight means something, or at least it used to. There was no yelling, no table pounding, just precision. She didn't need volume. She had velocity. We tell people to read the fine print on every app, every loan, every contract, but where's the fine print on this? When did we agree to be traced, traded, and triangulated for profit, and called it patriotism? At that moment, every law student, cybersecurity analyst, privacy watchdog, and bored teen on TikTok watching the stream sat up a little straighter, because this was the moment they would quote later, in op-eds, in essays, in lectures, in memes. Greene tried to interject, fumbling through a stack of pre-written talking points about weaponizing accountability, but the mic cut her off, not technically, just symbolically, because nothing she could say now would sound like anything but damage control. The data was out. The words had landed. The red folder wasn't just a prop anymore. It was a trigger. AOC didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had made the hearing hers, and now it belonged to the public. She could have ended there. After the data, the documentation, the damning quote about citizens becoming the product, AOC had every right to close her folder, drop the mic, and let the room choke on its silence. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her posture still firm, but her voice shifted. No longer the scalpel. Now, the echo. You know, where I grew up, we didn't have cloud services. We had rent and truth. The room paused as if unsure what to do with a statement that didn't sound like strategy, but memory. My father died when I was 19, she said, eyes steady but soft. Cancer doesn't wait for your dreams to get bigger. It doesn't care if you're ready. And when he was gone, it was just me, my mom, and an apartment where the ceiling leaked every time it rained. She didn't share it for pity. That much was obvious. This wasn't vulnerability, it was voltage. Not weakness, but witness. We didn't have spreadsheets explaining our struggle. No diagrams, no lobbyists, no access. Just hard decisions, week after week, like millions of families across this country who are being told to believe in bootstrap fantasies while billionaires float above accountability. The hearing room, once crowded with the static hum of politics as usual, now sat in a different kind of silence. This wasn't discomfort. This was reverence. AOC continued, no longer reading, not even glancing at notes. Now she was speaking from the part of her that had lived everything these committees often pretend to understand. You talk about enterprise, about success, about reward. But how many of you have waited in line at 5 a.m. outside a courthouse to get a rent assistance hearing? How many of you have watched your parents skip meals so the fridge stays on? And then she turned, not just to the committee, but to the cameras, to us. I stand here today not because of privilege, not because of power, but because people believed I would never stop asking hard questions, even when the answers made the system flinch. You could hear it in the room, the shift from analysis to accountability, from stats to soul. I've been told that I don't understand how business works, that I don't understand markets. What I understand is this: if your success depends on silence, it's not innovation, it's extraction. She looked down at her notes for a breath. Just one, then back up. My mom cleaned houses for a living. She scrubbed floors so I could study, so I could dream beyond the walls we were boxed into. Not so someone could turn our struggles into a spreadsheet and sell it back to us at premium. The screen behind her still displayed the whistleblower quote, the cloud, the battlefield, the product. But now it meant more. It wasn't just data. It was the digital evolution of the very inequality she'd grown up under, now weaponized, sanitized, and monetized. We're not here today to argue about politics. We're here because power has drifted into the hands of those who don't answer to the people. And if we don't pull it back, legally, legislatively, and unapologetically, then we're not a republic. We're a showroom. One aide from across the aisle scribbled something fast, then stopped, then crossed it out. Another looked up. Expression unreadable, but undeniably aware. This is not about left versus right, AOC said again, firmer now. It's about purchased influence versus earned responsibility. It's about remembering that power in a democracy isn't something you inherit through profit margins. It's something you're entrusted with by people, and only people. The weight of that sentence did something to the room. Even Greene, arms crossed tightly across her chest, now sat still, her jaw slightly clenched, eyes scanning a space beyond the moment, as if calculating what clips would hit first. And for anyone who thinks this is personal, AOC said finally, it is. Because what happens in this room touches the lives of families like mine, like millions across this country who pay their taxes, follow the rules, and keep showing up, even when the system forgets to show up for them. She turned calmly, deliberately, toward the main camera now, the one streaming to tens of thousands, and without raising her voice, she delivered the final blow, not of rage, but of purpose. Let the record show, some of us still work for the people. And then, still silent, she closed the folder. No fist pump, no grandstand, just a calm storm leaving the wreckage behind. The hearing wasn't over, but the verdict for anyone truly listening was in. The hearing resumed after a procedural break, but something was missing, not metaphorically. Literally. An empty chair sat at the witness table, its nameplate still in place. Dr. Calvin Maris, Data Security Specialist. The man Marjorie Taylor Greene had hyped all week, the so-called whistleblower, the independent expert who, according to her press release, was going to expose the data vulnerability fraud in federal agencies and the recklessness of liberal oversight. But he wasn't here. No explanation had been given to the public. Just a terse note passed to the chair 15 minutes prior to session. Dr. Maris will not be appearing today due to unforeseen scheduling issues. Unforeseen. At a hearing he'd agreed to headline. The cameras panned to the chair, then to Greene, who looked uncharacteristically tight-lipped. No smirk, no fire, just clipped pen movements and darting glances at her aide's phone. The silence around that chair said more than any testimony could have. Then AOC's mic came alive. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had already done the damage with data and clarity. This next part, this was just cleanup. It's unfortunate that Dr. Maris couldn't join us today, she began smoothly, eyes locked on the nameplate. Given how frequently he's joined Congresswoman Greene's private strategy calls, I would have thought his schedule would be aligned. A shift in the room, a crack in the ice. But since he's not here to clarify, I'll let the facts speak in his place. She lifted a small white folder this time. No theatrics, no buildup. Just facts, pure and flammable. Dr. Calvin Maris is not merely an academic. He also serves as chief technical advisor to a super PAC called Data for Liberty, which, according to FEC filings, spent over $6.2 million in support of Congresswoman Greene's 2022 campaign and an additional $1.1 million this year on targeted digital attack ads against federal education oversight. Gasps, this time audible. One staffer choked on her coffee. So the question becomes, AOC continued unfazed, was this witness ever coming here to present facts, or was he coming to perform a narrative? Then came the line, delivered not with anger but with razor-wire precision. So was it oversight or rehearsal? Social media detonated instantly. She said it. She said it. And just like that, the stage fell apart. AOC just turned the spotlight into an interrogation lamp. On the live stream, supercuts began within minutes. One clip zoomed in on Greene's reaction. Her blink, her lip twitch, her sharp intake of breath. Another slowed down AOC's line delivery like it was a finishing move in a video game. Was it oversight or rehearsal? Boom. Viral. But AOC wasn't chasing likes. She was chasing accountability. Now let's be clear, she said, her voice calm but firm. There is nothing inherently wrong with witnesses having political affiliations. But when someone is pitched as independent while being embedded in the very structure of campaign financing, the issue is no longer opinion. It's integrity. She tapped the folder once. And integrity doesn't get to skip hearings when the spotlight gets hot. Across the aisle, Greene tried to interject. Madam Chair, point of order. But the chair held up a hand. The gentlewoman from New York has the floor. AOC didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She pressed forward. We live in an era where influence is disguised as expertise, where donor strategy wears a lab coat and calls itself science. And if we allow that to shape public policy without disclosure, without scrutiny, without transparency, then this committee isn't a place of accountability. It's just a theater with better lighting. A beat, then. And the American people deserve more than a rehearsal. The tension was no longer abstract. It was real. Every staffer in that room, every journalist, every viewer could sense it. This wasn't partisan posturing. This was an exposure, and not just of a person, but of process. So the next time we're told a witness is coming to reveal a scandal, AOC said, glancing again at the still empty chair, let's ask who paid for the script. The camera cut once more to the chair. Empty, silent, accused. This wasn't a gotcha moment. It was a reckoning. And the chair, once meant to host a performance, had become a monument to the very problem AOC had warned about. A system so desperate to defend itself, it will stage hearings instead of holding them. She leaned back slightly, folded the folder closed, and said nothing more. She didn't have to. The damage was done. And across the internet, across state lines, classrooms, congressional watch lists, and kitchen tables, one truth echoed louder than any testimony that day. The chair was empty, but the truth was fully present. The tension hadn't faded. If anything, the empty chair still loomed large, an unspoken witness to a strategy unraveling in real time. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wasn't finished. Not yet. What she pulled out next wasn't red or blue. It wasn't a financial report or a procurement map. It was a plain, printed email. Black text, white paper, one sentence already highlighted. She didn't hold it up like a trophy. She didn't wave it. She laid it down gently on the table and adjusted the mic. This next piece, she said, wasn't part of the original hearing prep. It arrived anonymously, no name, just metadata. But the address checks out. It comes from a political consultant, one hired by a media team affiliated with a congressional super PAC. She paused, giving the committee time to shift in their seats, giving the room time to recognize that tone again. Not angry, not theatrical, but focused, controlled, dangerous. Subject line, strategy for Thursday's hearing. The words themselves didn't sound damning until she read the body of the message, and then everything shifted. We don't need to win. We just need noise. If she snaps, we get the headlines. Just get AOC to snap. That's all we need. Silence. But this time it wasn't stunned. It was humiliated. Greene looked down. The chair stiffened. Someone coughed behind the cameras. And then AOC smiled. Not a smug grin, not a smirk. A soft, almost apologetic curve of the mouth. The kind of smile that says, "You tried, really hard, and I saw it coming the whole time. Sorry to disappoint," she said quietly. The gallery laughed. Just a few at first, then more. The kind of laughter that isn't born from comedy, but from the absolute, uncontested reclaiming of control. A release of tension. A signal that the audience, the public, was now entirely, completely on her side. Because the trap had been baited, built, broadcasted, and she had walked right past it, unbothered, untouched. "You see, what we're witnessing today isn't oversight," she continued. "It's stagecraft, political theater dressed up in righteous outrage." She tapped the printed email once with her finger. Just once. And somehow it sounded louder than any gavel. "This isn't the first time people have tried to provoke me, to rattle me, to paint me into the role they wrote in advance. I've seen the script. It's always the same. Make her angry, call her emotional, sell the reaction." She looked up, and her gaze wasn't just directed at Greene anymore. It was aimed at every operative, every strategist, every consultant who had ever tried to turn democracy into content. "But I didn't come here to be content. I came here to be clear." Boom. Clips of that line flooded Twitter in seconds. Edited, captioned, shared. Some laid it over dramatic piano music. Others froze the frame right on her smile and stamped the words in red. "I didn't come here to be content. I came here to be clear." Back in the room, Greene was stone-faced, her playbook exposed, her star witness missing, and now her entire strategy laid bare, by the very person it was built to break. "And if anyone's curious," AOC added, "about how a hearing this important suddenly devolved into sound bites and showdowns, maybe ask yourself, who benefits from the chaos?" She didn't wait for an answer. She knew there wasn't one, because this wasn't just a takedown. This was a reversal, a moment when the hunted turned the entire hearing around without shouting, without storming, without even standing. When you stop seeing Congress as a place of service and start treating it like a soundstage, you forget who you're supposed to be working for. Another pause. Another shot from the camera, her hand resting gently over the email, her voice steady, no spikes, no stumble. "And let the record show, I'm still working for the people." Not a sound in the chamber. No applause because no one dared break the gravity. Even the chair, rigid and quiet, leaned back in his seat with the expression of a man who understood finally that this hearing had become something else. Not just a moment, but a message. AOC slid the email into the folder and closed it. Then she looked up at the gallery. Not the politicians, not the aides, but the real audience. The students watching in class, the workers tuning in from break rooms, the mothers folding laundry with C-SPAN humming in the background. And she gave them one more line, no louder than the last, but just as sharp. "You don't have to yell to be heard. You just have to mean what you say." The hearing continued technically. More talking points, more posturing. But the energy had shifted permanently. Because the email had done something none of the charts or contracts could. It proved the performance. And AOC? She dismantled the entire act with one smile, one sentence, and one refusal to be baited. There are moments in politics when everything shifts, not because someone shouted louder, but because the truth, laid bare, finally weighed more than the performance trying to bury it. This was one of those moments. The chairman adjusted his glasses, fumbled with the papers in front of him. His gavel hand hovered just inches above the desk, uncertain. The line AOC had just delivered, about the email, about being used as bait for headlines, still echoed in the hearing room like a bell no one wanted to stop ringing. AOC leaned slightly forward, composed as ever. Her voice remained level. "Mr. Chairman, before I yield, I'd like to read a short letter I received from a constituent in my district." The chairman hesitated. You could see it. He wanted to say no, to regain control, to move things forward and away from the wreckage now smoking in front of them. But there was something in the air, a hush that even he couldn't talk over. He gave a reluctant nod. "Proceed briefly." AOC unfolded the paper. No theatrics, no pause for camera effect, just one worn page, creased from having been opened and read too many times. "Dear Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, my name is Rosa. I'm a second-grade teacher in Queens. I've worked in public schools for 18 years. Last week, I found out our after-school program is being shut down due to budget realignment. Meanwhile, I watched a live stream where contractors got 7 figures for things I couldn't even pronounce. I'm tired, but I'm still here, because the kids are still here. If you speak in that room, please remember we're watching, and we need someone in that building who remembers us." The letter wasn't long, but it cracked something in the room. Not because it was emotional, though it was, but because it was undeniably real. It wasn't data, it wasn't ideology, it wasn't a trap. It was truth in handwriting. And that was when Greene tried to interrupt. "Point of order, this is not related to the current discussion of federal contracts." But before the chairman could respond, AOC raised a single finger, not to silence, not to scold, just to hold the floor, as if to say, "This belongs to the people now. You had your turn." "I'll be done in 30 seconds, she said coolly, eyes still on the letter. Greene started to raise her voice, trying to push the moment off balance. "Chair, this is grandstanding." But this time the chairman finally acted. "The gentlewoman from Georgia will suspend. The gentlewoman from New York has the floor." A murmur rippled. Staffers looked at each other. MTG leaned back, stunned, her mic automatically cut off, the literal and symbolic mute the room had waited years to see. She opened her mouth again, but this time, the feed stayed silent, and all eyes turned to AOC. She lowered the letter. "I'm not reading this because it makes anyone uncomfortable. I'm reading it because this letter is why we're here. No anger, no fire, just clarity like a blade. When billionaires fail a contract, they get another. When teachers ask for supplies, they get gaslit. When CEOs miscalculate, they get bailed out. When working-class parents miss a payment, they get evicted." Her voice was steady, but it vibrated with something unmistakable. Moral gravity. "So no, I won't apologize for reading a letter from a teacher. I won't yield truth just because someone in this room preferred sound bites over substance. I won't flinch because someone wanted a headline." Her hands were calm, her tone calm, but every word she spoke hit like thunder dressed in velvet. "Let the record show, the only person shouting in this room just got muted." You could feel it then. The room turned. Not with applause, not with gasps, but with something far more powerful, alignment. Even some on the other side of the aisle didn't speak, because this wasn't a partisan win. It was something bigger, a return to reality. AOC placed the letter down, folded her hands, and looked directly into the main camera. No smile, no gloat, just accountability on her face like steel. "Let the record show, some of us still carry the voices of the people in our pockets, creased, handwritten, and unforgettable." The chairman cleared his throat awkwardly. "The gentlewoman's time is—" But it didn't matter. The moment had already sealed itself. In that final shot, the camera zoomed in. tight on AOC's face. She wasn't triumphant. She wasn't satisfied. She was responsible. And in that still frame, as millions watched from across the country, they didn't see a politician delivering a line. They saw a leader who refused to become the performance, because she remembered who the stage was really for. The screen lit up. Behind AOC, a still image appeared. The Oval Office. Familiar. Presidential. But something was off. In the center of the photograph, legs casually crossed, body leaned forward in quiet authority, sat Elon Musk. To his left, a defense official. To his right, a top White House tech liaison. But there were no members of Congress, no press, no public record of the meeting, just one man with no elected title, seated at the very core of American power. A low ripple stirred in the room. Even on the live stream, comments exploded. The chat was a firestorm. Is that real? Why is he there? Where's the accountability? AOC stepped aside, letting the image speak before she did. When she turned back to the microphone, her tone was quiet, surgical. That photo was taken during a classified infrastructure discussion involving satellite operations, emergency response strategy, and federal data streams. And not a single voter-elected official was invited. Pause. The room tensed. Let me be very clear. Elon Musk is not a president. He's not a cabinet member. He's not an ambassador. He's a billionaire with Defense Department contracts and a PAC tied to members of this very committee. She raised her hand, palm open, not in anger, in challenge. If we allow billionaires to sit in for voters, what's left of the vote? The question hit hard, not just because of who it targeted, but because of what it revealed, that behind closed doors, wealth had become a seat at the table, and democracy was standing outside without a pass. AOC advanced her argument, not with rage, but with receipts. She pulled up another slide. On it, a list of recent policies influenced, or outright shaped, by big tech. The reclassification of encrypted communications, the scaling of AI surveillance tools under national security labels, the rapid greenlighting of satellite expansions without local consent, the quiet redirection of federal grants to private tech platforms for rural broadband, often in districts with no transparency. We're watching the architecture of governance shift from public to private hands, she said, voice calm but cutting. We are replacing oversight with NDAs, replacing hearings with hush briefings, and replacing citizens with CEOs. Across the room, no one interrupted. Even Greene, who had moments ago tried to re-seize narrative control, now sat still. AOC wasn't just dominating the floor, she was reshaping the battlefield. And then came the gut punch. AOC tapped her folder again, pulled out a timeline. It showed in staggering detail a trail of events. An emergency defense need flagged in April. Musk meets with federal tech advisors in May. Contract quietly expanded in June. Without audit, PAC contributions surge in July. Policy shifts in August to benefit the exact infrastructure involved. Dots connected themselves. Lines no one wanted drawn were now glowing under the lights of a hearing room. We've made corruption too polite to recognize, she said. But this is not new. It's just digitally disguised. The YouTube chat flooded again. This is insane. Say it louder, AOC. This needs to go viral, now. And it was. Clips of the Oval Office image were already circulating. People were zooming in on Musk's smirk, on the absence of representation, on the sheer quiet audacity of it all. But AOC didn't stop there. This isn't about Elon Musk, she clarified. It's about any billionaire who thinks the ballot box is optional when you bought the boardroom. It's about a system that's forgotten its North Star and replaced it with stock prices. She stepped closer to the mic. No slideshow, no visuals, just conviction. In a functioning democracy, policy is set by those the people choose, not those the market rewards. But today we're seeing a shift so subtle it's almost elegant, and that's what makes it dangerous. She looked around the room, then straight into the camera. So I ask again, if we let billionaires sit in for voters, what exactly are we protecting when we say we defend democracy. Dead silence. Even those who disagreed knew this moment would be replayed, remixed, dissected, and shared a million times over. Because this wasn't just a hearing, it was a warning, and AOC had issued it without shouting once. She turned, clicked off the slide, and took her seat. But in every living room, newsroom, and phone screen across America, one image burned brighter than the rest. A billionaire in the Oval Office, with no voters in sight, and one voice calm but unyielding, asking the question millions didn't know they needed. Who's really sitting at the table when we're not invited? The room was still. No one interrupted. AOC didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The screen behind her flashed white. Then a tweet appeared, framed like evidence in a courtroom. Elon Musk. Date stamped. Verified. His exact words. Pretty sure Gaza gets mostly condoms as aid. That's the problem. A murmur broke through the chamber. Half disbelief, half rage. AOC didn't blink. She let the room absorb it. Then she spoke. This wasn't a joke. This was a broadcast. And when you have 160 million followers, lies don't just echo, they infect. Her tone was steady, her delivery deliberate, but there was no mistaking the blade beneath the calm. She turned to a second slide. USAID shipment logs, real ones, scanned manifests, pallets, cargo codes, labels, wheat, IV fluids, antibiotics, baby formula, insulin. She let them scroll for a moment. Then came UN documentation, UNICEF and WHO reports detailing trauma kits, clean water tablets, solar lamps for hospitals during power cuts. This, she said, motioning to the screen, is the truth. This is what gets sent, what gets risked, what volunteers pack at 2 a.m. in warehouses in New Jersey and Istanbul, what children wait for while bombs fall. And then she turned, locking eyes with the room, her voice cutting clean. And he reduced it to condoms. Silence again, but it wasn't quiet. It was electric, the kind of silence that screams. AOC stepped closer to the mic. We're not just battling misinformation. We're battling dehumanization. Because when you turn a starving child into a punchline, when you reduce a humanitarian crisis into late-night snark, you're not speaking freely. You're silencing reality. She clicked forward, another slide. A child, age 6, hooked to a ventilator in Rafah. The caption below, UNICEF Field Report, Week 3. No commentary needed, no theatrics. The image shouted enough. Propaganda isn't always built in back rooms, AOC continued. Sometimes it's tweeted from the driver's seat of a luxury car. But the outcome's the same. When facts are mocked, propaganda thrives, and democracy bleeds. Greene tried to interject, tried to label this a personal attack. AOC didn't even turn. This isn't personal, it's public, it's policy, it's influence without consequence, power without empathy. And then came the twist no one saw coming. She held up a hard copy, an internal State Department memo. It showed a noticeable dip in American donations to Gaza relief following Musk's viral tweet. One sentence, one lie, thousands of meals canceled. The camera panned to the crowd. Some gasped, some looked down. Even staffers behind MTG whispered, shoulders stiff, eyes wide. AOC kept going. When we normalize contempt, we weaponize cruelty. And when billionaires decide what counts as truth, what dies next is trust. In each other, in our systems, in the very idea that facts matter. The screen behind her went dark, just black. And then a single quote appeared. It's not what we know that's dangerous, it's what we think we know, because someone richer said it louder. She didn't name herself as the author, but everyone knew. YouTube comment sections lit up instantly. Some typed fire, fire, fire over and over. Others clipped the phrase, turning it into shorts, reels, and quotes that would dominate the next 48 hours. And just when it felt like she had delivered her final blow, AOC lowered her voice again. A final line, almost a whisper. This wasn't a mistake, it was strategy, distraction dressed as sarcasm, and I refused to let cruelty pass as commentary. She sat down, but no one forgot the image of a 6-year-old on a ventilator. No one forgot the line, thousands of meals canceled. And no one forgot the silence that followed a billionaire's punchline. This wasn't just a hearing. This was a reckoning. It was the moment the opposition had been waiting for. After hours of testimony, charts, documents, and a searing dismantling of billionaire backdoor influence, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned forward, eyes narrowed, and dropped her line like a hammer. The gentle lady from New York doesn't just disagree. She despises this country. Gasps, murmurs, and a camera swing. A classic tactic when cornered by facts, attack the flag. But AOC didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She sat up straighter, her voice quiet, but thunderous in clarity. I don't hate this country. I just refuse to auction it off. Silence. The kind that rips through oxygen like fire. The kind that dares anyone to laugh. Loving this country, she continued, means asking who profits when truth is sold. It means protecting the people, not just the people who profit. Her words were sharp, not shouted, just sharp enough to cut through marble and myth alike. She pointed at the screen behind her, flashing images of headlines over the years. Military contracts awarded without oversight, whistleblowers fired, classrooms collapsing while satellites soared. We are told to salute the flag while ignoring who's laundering the payroll. MTG shifted in her chair, tried to speak again, but the energy in the room had shifted, and it wasn't in her favor. Cameras caught it, subtle but unmistakable. A Republican from Texas glanced down, jaw clenched. Another from Ohio pretended to check notes, but it was clear he was avoiding eye contact. One aide, standing in the corner, quietly slid a folder under his arm and stepped back behind the curtain. AOC didn't name names. She didn't need to. You want to talk patriotism? She asked. Then let's talk about who funds the lobbyists who write your bills. Let's talk about who shows up at veteran town halls and who shows up at yacht fundraisers in Miami. The chamber stirred. That line was designed to sting, and it did. She moved closer to the mic, her tone now both personal and political. My father died in this country. My mother cleaned houses in this country. I waited tables, filed taxes, paid off student loans in this country. Don't you dare question my love for it, just because I won't sell it to the highest bidder. The committee chair tried to move on, but she wasn't done. If your definition of patriotism is silence while billionaires play government, then I'm proud to be your disappointment. Boom. That line would be replayed 1,000 times by nightfall. TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Shoshone Instagram Reels. Every clip was already being cut by volunteer accounts who knew exactly what made a moment go viral. And then it happened. Greene folded her arms, huffed, then muttered, "You just want attention." AOC turned toward her, not with fire, but with steel. If attention is what it takes to expose the rot, then yes, I'll shine every light I have. No yelling, no finger pointing, just controlled demolition of a narrative that had held too long. Another murmur moved through the room, and this time the cameras didn't cut away. They lingered, on Greene's clenched jaw, on AOC's locked gaze, on the Democratic aides who stopped typing and started listening, on the Republican interns suddenly unsure whether to clap or hide, and finally, on the American flag above the chamber. Silent, still, watching. Because here was the truth no one in that room wanted to admit. She didn't hate America. She just reminded it that it wasn't for sale. The room had seen charts, contracts, and contracts buried beneath other contracts, but none of them hit like this. AOC reached into her folder, not the red one this time, but something simpler, a white envelope, handwritten, a Bronx school logo stamped faintly in the corner. She held it gently, almost protectively, then looked up. This isn't from a PAC. This isn't from a think tank. It's from a 7th grader in the South Bronx. Her name is Soraya, and she asked me to read this. The room hushed. A camera zoomed in, slowly, deliberately. Dear Congresswoman AOC, they said my teacher won't be here next year. My mom says it's because the school doesn't have enough money. But then on the news, they said someone got millions to make war tech. Why are they firing my teacher and giving bonuses to war tech? A pause. Not dramatic, just heavy. I thought we were supposed to learn how to stop war, not get paid to make it. Love, Soraya. AOC's voice didn't tremble, but something else did. The entire tone of the room. She folded the letter neatly, didn't cry, didn't sermonize. This is what real patriotism looks like. A kid who still believes we can be better. She let that sit, let it burn its way into every live stream, every short, every headline still being typed mid-hearing. Then she raised her voice, not in volume, but in weight. If this government can write billion-dollar checks to defense contractors without blinking, but won't lift a finger to save a seventh-grade teacher's job, then we're not broke. We're broken. MTG shifted in her seat, flipping through papers, clearly rattled. One Republican aide was seen whispering frantically into a phone. Another lobbyist in the back quietly exited the room, face pale. Do you know what it feels like, AOC continued, to look a kid in the eye and say, sorry, we had to choose between missiles and math class. And missiles won? The answer came not from the chamber, but from the YouTube live stream. Thousands of comments pouring in like a dam cracking open. I'm a teacher. I feel this in my bones. This is what the news should be showing. Protect Soraya. Protect the future. This isn't politics. It's survival. And one that went instantly viral. She's not just reading a letter. She's reading America's conscience. AOC tapped the microphone twice, calmly, then drove the next nail. Some of you call this drama. I call it data. Because every child we abandon for a drone contract is a statistic waiting to become a tragedy. She didn't just deliver a speech, she detonated a truth bomb wrapped in innocence. And the fallout was emotional. You want to question my patriotism? She asked, echoing MTG's earlier jab. Then come to the Bronx, look Soraya in the eyes, and tell her your donors needed the money more than her classroom did. The silence that followed wasn't procedural, it was moral. Even the chairman leaned back, eyes downward, lips pressed tight. Somewhere backstage, a staffer hit record on their phone. Not for internal notes, but because they knew this moment would rewrite the next 24 hours of political conversation. She doesn't have lobbyists, AOC said, closing the folder. She only has us. Final shot, a close-up of the envelope, worn at the edges, now marked in history, not as a prop, but as a turning point. Because in that instant, Soraya wasn't just a seventh grader, she was the new face of accountability. AOC didn't start with data, she started with a name. Mrs. Ledesma, she wasn't a CEO, she didn't have stock options or a lobbying firm, but she bought us books out of her paycheck. She paused. Let the weight settle. No theatrics, just memory made sharp. I still remember her handing me a used copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. She had taped the spine together herself. The room stilled. The contrast was already forming. No charts needed. That's what investing in the future looks like. Not boardrooms, not spaceports, a tired teacher with scotch tape and a dream. Then came the pivot, surgical but savage. Meanwhile, the same government that makes her fund her own classroom grants billions in tax shields to tech corporations that hide behind LLCs and lobbyists. She looked directly at the committee chair. Why is a woman with chalk on her hands expected to save democracy, but billionaires in custom rockets are exempt from scrutiny? A ripple of discomfort swept through the chamber. Not from volume, AOC hadn't raised her voice, but from impact. It wasn't just a takedown, it was a teardown of the system. We treat our teachers like beggars, and our tech tycoons like sacred temples. One is asked to justify every pencil. The other? Every loophole is a gift. She held up a chart, not flashy, just devastating. It showed the average out-of-pocket spending by public school teachers next to defense tech corporate tax breaks. This is America's budget priorities, drawn in blood and red ink. MTG shifted uncomfortably, but didn't interrupt. The moment was too hot to touch. Mrs. Ledesma didn't just teach me grammar, AOC continued. She taught me what power really is. Not money, not status, but impact. She leaned forward, and that's what terrifies some people in this room, because they know you can't buy that kind of power. You have to earn it. The audience watching online erupted. One clip, AOC saying she was never funded, but she built futures, was already being sliced, subtitled, and reshared across Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter under hashtags like #GPowerEyesPeople and #Mrs. Ledesma was my teacher too. She wasn't done. We hold congressional hearings over minor tax credits for low-income families, but not one hearing on how big tech gets to play God with our infrastructure, our data, and our elections. She pointed to a thick folder. This is how many pages a public school has to fill out to apply for lunch subsidies. And this, she tapped a single sheet of paper, is all it takes for a tech firm to secure a $15 million drone contract. One page, one signature, no questions. Then came the gut punch. In this country, we audit our teachers, but not our billionaires. We penalize compassion and subsidize conquest. The committee chair tried to interject. AOC calmly gestured. I'll yield in 30 seconds, but I think the American people deserve 30 seconds of truth. The room fell quiet again. My teacher didn't ask for headlines. She didn't chase investors. She invested in me. So every time I sit in this chair, I bring her with me, and I will not let her be outshouted by those who confuse capital with character. She yielded, but the silence afterward was louder than any rebuttal. Somewhere backstage, a young staffer texted, "This isn't testimony, this is tectonic." Back in the live stream chat, the top comment read, "If Mrs. Ledesma taught civics, AOC is the final exam." She didn't shout. She didn't raise her hand. She simply waited. In that silence, it roared. AOC stood in the heart of the chamber, posture calm, tone even, but her words carried the weight of a generation watching. She opened with no preamble, no political platitude, just one devastating truth. Some don't speak because they're silenced, she said, each syllable slow, precise, deliberate. Others stay quiet because they profit. A tremor ran through the room, not in volume, but in impact. You could see it in the way a lobby-aligned aide suddenly stopped typing, in the way the chairman, mid-sip, paused his coffee halfway to his lips. The silence she spoke of wasn't abstract. It had names, budgets, contracts. It showed up in the vote to block whistleblower protections. It whispered behind closed doors when surveillance bills passed unchallenged. It screamed every time a corporate donor walked into a public office like it was their private boardroom. She turned toward a thick binder labeled Public Input, Ignored, and read aloud excerpts from citizens who had written in and never received a reply. One story stood out. A veteran whose data was used without consent to test predictive algorithms tied to border enforcement. The vet had never even been asked. They used his service to justify it, then used his silence to erase him. Gasps, faint but audible, scattered through the gallery. One aide reached for their phone. Another member looked nervously toward the cameras. And then AOC delivered the blow that made the live stream light up. "I didn't come here to win arguments," she said, looking dead into the lens. "I came to ask the questions they fear." Within minutes, the clip was on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram Reels. The phrase became a digital anthem, captioned beneath montages of teachers protesting, workers walking out, even students holding up their debt notices. The internet didn't just quote her, it echoed her. But in the room, the tension deepened. MTG tried to speak but was met with procedural silence. No recognition, no response. AOC was still in control. She stepped forward, holding up a simple line graph. No fire, just facts. It showed a 10-year decline in funding for public education and a matching spike in government spending on data acquisition contracts with private firms. "Funny," she said softly, "how the same Congress that says it can't afford after-school programs finds billions to monitor your browsing habits." A few Republican members stared down at their desks, unmoving. Cameras zoomed in on one who had previously boasted about cutting wasteful social programs, but was now exposed for approving a defense tech loophole worth $300 million. She told no jokes. She offered no drama. Just one more sentence. "They aren't afraid of riots. They're afraid of records." She held up a Freedom of Information Act request she had filed 6 months prior. No reply. The subject line, "Data brokers in government procurement." No reply. Just silence. But now it's on the record, she said, and the record doesn't forget. YouTube comments surge. She weaponized the silence. This is how you hold power accountable, without shouting. I've never seen someone so calm and so dangerous to corruption. She didn't smirk. She didn't blink. She just stood there, letting the moment breathe. And then came the unexpected. A handwritten note passed down the dais. Not from her party, a Republican staffer quietly sliding it forward. Viewers caught a glimpse before the camera cut. 4 words in thick ink. Keep going. We hear. By now, Twitter was ablaze. Her quotes were trending in 6 countries. Activists began creating posters. One clip used her voiceover against footage of closed factory schools and gleaming big tech campuses. This isn't about hate, she added in her final statement. It's about hunger, for truth, for decency, for something money can't buy, accountability. She closed the binder. The camera panned wide. The chamber looked smaller now, dwarfed by the moment. Somewhere in the back, a student intern wiped away a tear. Another pressed record on their phone, not to go viral, but to remember what real courage sounds like. And AOC, she walked out without fanfare, without celebration, and without a single step out of rhythm. Because the truth, when spoken clearly, doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be heard. MTG lunged forward with the desperation of someone cornered, not by words, but by truth. You're using politics to divide this country, she spat. AOC didn't flinch. She didn't counterattack. She just looked at MTG for a long, quiet beat, then replied, calm, cutting, unforgettable. Unity without truth isn't healing, it's amnesia. The room fell still. Even the usual whisperers stopped. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a reckoning. And in that moment, MTG, the woman who had shouted down experts, stormed out of hearings and made chaos her signature, was left with nothing but silence. AOC turned toward the room. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. What scares you more, she asked, eyes scanning the chamber. A broken system exposed, or an informed public asking, why? No one moved. One Republican reached for their water, but set it down without drinking. The camera caught each face one by one, each avoiding her gaze. No answer, no courage. Not even from MTG, who sat frozen, lips tight, fury drained. Outside, the live stream comment section exploded. Inside, the silence said everything. Truth had asked a question, and power had no reply. Without another word, AOC closed the red folder. The soft click echoed like a gavel. She stood slowly. No fist pumping, no applause. Just conviction. As she turned, the camera followed her steps all the way to the hallway. No cut, no fade. Just a quiet walk that felt louder than any scream. She didn't need to win a debate. She changed the temperature of the room, and as the doors closed behind her, a single caption faded into view across millions of screens. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. That's how history remembers a turning point. The clip didn't just go viral, it detonated. Cable news ran it. TikTok remixed it. But it wasn't the memes that mattered, it was the letters, the essays, the classrooms that paused to replay those 5 minutes. In a tiny Texas town, a teacher dimmed the lights. AOC's voice echoed through a projector as 20 students leaned in, spellbound. The moment had left Capitol Hill. Now it was reshaping cafeterias, debates, and dinner tables across America. And as the final words replayed on screen, someone in the back whispered, "Why does this feel bigger than just politics?" Because it was. A young girl raised her hand, eyes wide with curiosity. Did she yell? The teacher chuckled gently. No, she replied, but the whole country heard her. The class sat in rare stillness. They hadn't just watched a hearing, they'd witnessed something shift. Outside the window, the sun lit the hallway in amber. Inside, one student quietly peeled a sticker off her backpack and pressed it onto her laptop. Black text on white, just 3 words. Ask why, always. Because sometimes the loudest revolution doesn't come from shouting. It comes from the courage to question, especially when you're told not to. She stood at the threshold of her office, looking out over the Capitol at sunset. The noise had died down. The news cycle moved on. But the weight of what was said and unsaid still lingered. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't need to. The message had already traveled further than any headline. AOC exhaled slowly, her hand resting on the red folder now tucked beneath her arm. The light hit her face, not like a spotlight, but like a signal. Then quietly, the final words appeared across the screen. You don't win change by yelling loudest. You win it by never sitting down. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. When AOC stood her ground without raising her voice, something bigger than politics happened. It wasn't a clapback. It was a civic awakening. She didn't seek applause. She forced silence to listen. And in that moment, millions heard what power fears most, a calm truth. Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace, when speaking up could change the story? Sometimes courage doesn't roar. It asks the one question they can't answer. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.